She was a woman whose life was defined by trust, whose heart
Are you sure
believed the
about
man
this?
beside her, her husband, her partner, her sanctuary, loved her not for her wealth, but for her. Minutes away from signing over a $1 billion inheritance, a fortune that should have cemented their promise, she stood with pen in hand and only calm assurance in her chest. Then, from behind a door, she heard 3 cold words that shattered that promise forever. He wants it gone. In that moment, love turned to fury, trust into a weapon. She realized that the man she loved had become her greatest threat. She had to decide, sign it all away or fight back with everything she had. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Who was Sophia Williams, heir to a $1 billion empire? To the public, she was the polished daughter of a dynasty, a woman who carried wealth like a second skin, yet longed for something money could not buy, an honest heart beside her. And who was Daniel Miller, the man who captured that heart? To many, he was the picture of charm, the man who could walk into any room and command it with a smile, a lawyer who rose from modest beginnings into her world of privilege. But beneath the polished exterior, questions lingered. Why would a man who had been given access to everything, love, wealth, power, risk it all? And what words did Sophia overhear that turned her world into a battlefield between devotion and survival? These questions hung in the air, heavy and unresolved, daring us to follow the path that led from trust to ultimate betrayal. Sophia Williams was born into a world where wealth was inherited, not earned. The Williams name carried with it estates, businesses, and a fortune worth billions. To the outside world, Sophia appeared untouchable, her life one of effortless privilege. Yet behind the elegant appearances was a woman searching for something money had never guaranteed, love that was sincere. She longed to be valued not for her last name or her bank account, but for the quiet moments of trust that money could not purchase. And then came Daniel Miller, a man whose story could not have been more different. Raised in modest surroundings, he carried himself with a confidence that charmed everyone he met. A lawyer with ambition, wit, and a smile that seemed to open doors. Daniel was the kind of man who looked at Sophia not as an heiress, but as a woman. At least, that was what she believed. Their romance moved quickly, almost too quickly. A whirlwind that left Sophia dizzy with excitement, and her circle of friends whispering about how perfect he seemed. He knew how to surprise her, how to listen, how to make her feel as though the vast empire she would one day inherit meant little compared to the sound of her laughter. Within months, their romance bloomed into a fairy tale wedding. Cameras flashed as the billionaire heiress and the lawyer from humble beginnings stood hand in hand, promising forever. To the world, it was a union that bridged 2 very different lives. To Sophia, it was proof that love could truly conquer the cynicism that money often brings. Yet within the promises and champagne toasts, subtle warnings stirred quietly beneath the surface. Daniel's charm, while intoxicating, carried with it an edge she could not always explain. He asked often about finances, about trusts and estates, about the structures of the Williams empire. At first, Sophia dismissed it as curiosity from a man entering her world. But over time, those questions multiplied, sometimes framed as jokes, other times as practical conversations about their future. It unsettled her mother, Margaret Williams, who had weathered her own battles over money and loyalty. One afternoon, in the quiet of the family estate, her mother's voice carried a weight that Sophia had learned not to ignore. Trust is never blind. Even love must see. But Sophia, lost in the glow of her whirlwind romance, brushed aside the warning, convincing herself that Daniel was different. And yet, beneath the sparkle of their love story, the tension between money and trust grew slowly, quietly, like a shadow that refused to be banished. Every smile Daniel offered seemed flawless, almost rehearsed. Every affectionate gesture left her heart full, but her mind questioning. It was a tug of war between emotion and reason, between hope and doubt. And so, Sophia pressed forward, telling herself that true love required faith, not suspicion. But fate had its own way of exposing truth. Because on the very morning she was set to hand Daniel Miller everything, whispers behind a closed door shattered her illusions and forced her to confront the reality she had spent years trying to deny. The morning of the signing began like any other, but for Sophia Williams it carried the weight of a lifetime. She rose before dawn, the silence of the mansion wrapping around her as she prepared for what she believed would be the most defining gesture of her marriage, handing Daniel Miller control of her billion-dollar inheritance. The aroma of coffee drifted through the air, grounding her nerves, while Daniel sat in the kitchen, calm, collected, a faint smile on his lips as though nothing in the world could disturb his confidence. He looked at her with the ease of a man who believed the day was already his. She, however, carefully dressed with a sense of ceremony, rehearsing in her mind the words of trust and devotion she had told herself she would repeat once the papers were signed. To her, this was not a transaction. It was proof that love mattered more than money, that Daniel was not just her husband, but her partner in every sense. The car was already waiting, the lawyer had been scheduled, the contracts drawn. Everything about the day had been arranged with precision, as though fate itself had carved out this moment. Yet fate often speaks in whispers, not shouts, and it was in those whispers that Sophia's world began to crack. As she made her way down the hallway, intent on gathering her belongings before leaving for the office, she paused. Voices filtered faintly from the study where Daniel often took his calls. She hadn't intended to eavesdrop, but the sharp tone of his voice caught her attention, freezing her steps mid-stride. She leaned closer, heart quickening as each word became clearer, undeniable. She heard Daniel Miller, the man she loved, the man she was minutes away from entrusting with her entire future, speaking in a voice that carried no affection, no devotion, only calculation. "Once she signs," he said, his tone clipped and certain, "the money's ours. Then we won't need her anymore." The words struck Sophia like a blade to the chest. Her grip tightened on the doorknob beside her, nails pressing into the wood as though she needed something tangible to remind her she was still standing. For a moment, her mind rejected it, desperate to believe she had misheard, that the man she trusted above all others could not have uttered such cruelty. But the echo of his words left no room for doubt. Sophia's breath caught, her heart pounding so violently she feared it might betray her presence. Every memory of Daniel's questions about finances, every time his charm had seemed too polished, every warning her mother had given, all of it collapsed into this single moment of revelation. The love she had fought to defend now felt like a carefully constructed lie, one designed to disarm her long enough for him to seize everything. She staggered back quietly, the floor beneath her suddenly unfamiliar, her world tilting with the weight of betrayal. In the silence that followed, her mind raced. Had she uncovered not just greed, but a plot that could erase her from her own life? The pen waiting at the lawyer's office was supposed to seal their bond, but now it loomed as a weapon, one that, if wielded in blindness, could cost her not only her fortune, but perhaps far more. And so the question lingered, sharp and unrelenting. Was this paranoia, a heart-twisting truth into fear? Or had Sophia Williams just uncovered a plot to erase her from her own fortune and from her own life? Sophia Williams did not confront Daniel Miller that morning. She wanted to. Her pulse demanded it, her trembling hands begged for it. But instinct told her that anger would give away her discovery, and once exposed, Daniel would vanish behind layers of lies she could never untangle. Instead, she pulled back quietly, slipping from the hallway as though nothing had been heard. Outwardly, she carried on with her mourning, meeting his gaze, even forcing a faint smile when he asked about her nerves before the signing. But inside, her heart raced with a clarity that had replaced love with caution. She knew she could not sign. She knew she could not ignore what she had heard. The only question that remained was how deep Daniel Miller's betrayal truly ran. Sophia turned to the one resource money had always afforded her, discretion. That afternoon, under the guise of visiting an old friend, she hired a private investigator. The man was seasoned, accustomed to the secrets of the wealthy and powerful, and within days his findings began to strip away the illusion Sophia had built her marriage upon. Daniel Miller, the polished lawyer who had captivated her, carried debts so vast they read like a ledger of desperation. Gambling losses, unpaid loans, and quiet threats from creditors traced a path that explained the urgency in his voice when he spoke of the money being theirs. For Sophia, each page of the report was another nail in the coffin of trust. But the debts were only the beginning. The investigator followed Daniel through the city, capturing meetings in dimly lit restaurants, phone calls taken too far from home, and once, an embrace exchanged with a woman Sophia had never seen before. She was younger, stylish, and her presence spoke volumes about the double life Daniel had been nurturing. Sophia's stomach twisted as photographs landed on her desk, proof that her marriage was not built on love, but on strategy. A strategy that placed her at the center as the target, not the partner. As whispers of tension began leaking into society columns, the media caught hints of discontent in what had once been a perfect union. A missed dinner appearance here, a canceled charity event there, all adding fuel to speculation that the Williams heiress's marriage was faltering. Sophia kept silent, but beneath the silence was a calculated storm. She brought the information to the police quietly, not as an accusation, but as a precaution. She had wealth. She had enemies. And now she had reason to believe that her husband might be her greatest one. They agreed to monitor discreetly, placing Daniel under a quiet watch. Daniel Miller, however, sensed change. He was not a fool. He noticed the way Sophia no longer reached for his hand in public, the hesitation in her eyes when he leaned in with affection. And so he adapted. He doubled down on charm, brought her flowers without reason, reminded her of the fairy tale wedding with spontaneous gestures of affection. To the outside world, he played the perfect husband more convincingly than ever before. But for Sophia, every smile, every caress, every promise was a performance, and she could no longer applaud. The private investigator did not stop digging. Within weeks, he found a burner phone hidden away in Daniel's car, filled with coded messages about transfers and meetings Sophia was never supposed to know about. One message hinted at large sums moving overseas, a silent trail of money leaving the country, preparing for a life beyond her reach. Worse still, another discovery revealed a shadow, someone else working alongside Daniel, a mysterious partner whose identity remained just out of sight. Was this woman he had been seen with simply a lover, or was she part of the plan? And if so, how far did their betrayal extend? The clock was ticking, the net tightening, and Sophia realized she was not just dealing with a husband who lied. She was facing a scheme larger than herself, one that threatened her fortune. The courtroom was silent, every word heavy with the weight of betrayal. Sophia Williams sat poised, her eyes locked on Daniel Miller as the documents were brought forward, pages that laid bare the depth of his deceit. What the investigators had uncovered went beyond whispered phone calls and hidden debts. The papers showed intent to forge her signature if she hesitated, intent to strip her of her fortune even if she refused to hand it over willingly. It was not the mark of a man desperate for help. It was the blueprint of a predator who had calculated every step. The air thickened when the mistress was called to the stand. Her testimony broke whatever fragments of illusion remained. In a voice steady, almost rehearsed, she admitted what Daniel had promised her. He said once she was out of the way, we'd live like royalty. The words echoed across the courtroom like a gunshot. Gasps rose from the gallery, the sound of disbelief that a man once admired for his charm could be revealed as so ruthlessly ambitious. Sophia's fury, long held behind composure, erupted not in chaos, but in clarity. She turned, her voice firm, her gaze unshaken as she spoke directly to the room. He didn't just want my love, he wanted my life. It was not a plea for sympathy, but a declaration, an unveiling of the truth she had carried since the morning she overheard him. For Sophia, this was not merely betrayal of a marriage. It was betrayal of her very existence, of the trust that had defined her identity. Daniel Miller, once the man who charmed her into believing in love beyond wealth, sat stone-faced. Yet behind his silence lay the remnants of a plan collapsing under the weight of evidence. Documents, testimonies, bank transfers, each piece connected to the same conclusion. His betrayal was deliberate, premeditated, and merciless. But the courtroom is rarely a place where truth ends cleanly. Just as Sophia Williams thought the betrayal had been fully exposed, another revelation surfaced, one that sent shockwaves through the walls of justice and left her questioning whether the man she once loved had acted alone, or whether the conspiracy reached deeper into the very circle she trusted most. The courtroom revelation should have ended the nightmare for Sophia Williams, but betrayal rarely closes with one door. As investigators pressed deeper into the evidence, a chilling truth emerged. Daniel Miller had not orchestrated his plan alone. The documents bore signatures and drafts Sophia had never seen, legal phrasing crafted with precision, and trails of correspondence that could not have been the work of Daniel's hand alone. When the truth was unmasked, it cut even closer to the bone. Her own family lawyer, the man entrusted for years with safeguarding the Williams fortune, had conspired with Daniel in secret. The betrayal was not merely a husband's greed, but a collusion of trust twisted into a weapon, a plot that sought to strip her of everything under the guise of loyalty and law. Sophia's world, already fractured, cracked further. She realized that the deception had been woven so tightly into her daily life that even the one sworn to protect her interests had stood ready to erase her. Yet, it was in that moment that Sophia's resolve hardened. She refused to be a victim of her own silence. Using her access, her intelligence, and the very wealth Daniel had sought to control, she revoked the inheritance transfer before it could be executed. With the stroke of her own pen, she dismantled the empire they had tried to build on her downfall. The scheme collapsed under its own arrogance. Daniel Miller was arrested in a storm of flashing cameras and heavy headlines, his name forever tied not to charm or brilliance, but to betrayal. The lawyer, once respected in the halls of power, was exposed, disgraced, and led away as a conspirator in the plot. Yet justice, though delivered, did not heal the wound left in Sophia's heart. The courtroom victory did not erase the nights spent believing she had been loved, nor did it quiet the echo of those words she had once overheard in the hallway. Once she signs, the money's ours. Then we won't need her anymore. Sophia Williams walked out of that chapter scarred, the world still seeing her as the billionaire heiress who triumphed over betrayal, while inside she carried a hollowness that could not be filled with wealth or applause. Trust, she learned, is the most dangerous currency. When it is broken, even $1 billion cannot buy it back. And in the end, the greatest loss was not her fortune, for she had preserved it, but the faith she once had in love itself. Daniel Miller had taken that, and no court or verdict could ever return it. In the end, Sophia Williams stood as both victor and survivor, but survival does not always feel like triumph. The billion-dollar inheritance she had nearly surrendered remained in her hands, yet the love she thought would shield her had transformed into the sharpest betrayal of her life. Daniel Miller was gone, taken by the weight of justice, yet his absence was not freedom. It was a haunting reminder of how close she had come to losing everything. For Sophia, the scars were not measured in money, but in the emptiness that lingered where trust used to live. And now the question falls to you, the one who has followed her journey to this moment. What would you have done if you were Sophia? Would you have signed away the fortune in blind faith, clinging to the man you loved, or would you have walked away from the promises, no matter how much it broke your heart? These are not questions with easy answers, but they are the questions betrayal forces us to ask. And if you thought the story of Sophia Williams and Daniel Miller was shocking, wait until you hear about another heiress, one who faked her own death to escape a web of betrayal, only to reappear alive and unbroken on the very day her husband celebrated his second wedding. That tale, too, will leave you questioning the boundaries of loyalty, deception, and the lengths a person will go to protect their truth. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos.